Hi, we're back. I'm Chloe Obala,
I'm Sita Severson.
and we are Vedic Wisdom Unfiltered. And today we're talking about releasing shame-based healing. Sita and I really felt like there was more to bring out after our last episode when we were talking about this. And so we decided that we needed to have another episode to kind of open up the rest of the can of worms or confetti, as we like to do, that there was more to unearth. So we're going to get into that today. So,
Yay.
Sita, I would like to hear, I'm really interested in your yoga story. Are you okay with starting there? Because I can't
Sure.
wait to hear about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
For anyone who was listening to last week, this was sort of like that second can that I referred to. You don't have to have listened to last week, though, for this to make sense at all. But so I'll make a very long story shorter so I can sort of express more in the way that it relates to the topic. Um, but my husband Zeb and I purchased an existing yoga studio in 2021, and I had wanted my own space for years, like probably about 16, 17 years. Like I'd looked at spaces in the past. I had actually signed on one space and it fell through for like really weird reasons, and so I basically took that as it just, it wasn't the time, which was fine. So we happened to find a studio that was for sale, actually like 3 miles from our house, which was like, whoa, that it really got our attention. And so one of the things that we asked when we were purchasing the studio, well, first of all, when we went for our first like walkthrough, we did, at the time, because it was sort of a hush hush and we hadn't signed a non-disclosure yet, we didn't know what studio it was. We got enough information to learn that it was like close by, but we didn't have any more information than that. So one of the things that we didn't know when we got there was that it was a hot yoga studio. And so Zeb and I, neither of us are fans of hot yoga. I'll just put that right out there. I think the way Ayurveda works, it's like, honestly, anything can be medicine, and there can be a place for most things. But as like a general practice, hot yoga is not good for most people, and definitely not good for usually the people who really love their hot yoga. That's the trick. So we looked at each other and we were like, because we kind of wondered, like, is this going to be a deal breaker for us?
Yeah.
Because it's just not what we want. But we felt like so many other things are really lining up for us, and it seemed like it was a great place for us to go. And we had asked and even visited some classes, like, what's the orientation here? Is this very like there was fitness classes there, but we wanted to know, like, is this community really open to learning about like true yoga, or what's their orientation? So we got the studio. um I learned very quickly that it was a fitness studio that had yoga classes. And I had never really thought about that distinction before, but it is a very different way of approaching things, for sure.
Yeah.
And without a doubt, it was not where mine and Zeb's hearts were. And so our plan, not that there's anything wrong with fitness or anything wrong with any of that, but what that meant to us was that the parts of us that really wanted to deal with true wellness, really helping to balance people out. Like, I'm a yoga therapist. I'm not really a yoga teacher. I teach asana practice. I usually do that very specifically for the people who are working with me. There's a reason why we're doing it. And I craft what I'm doing because I appreciate the brilliance of the asana practice and all the things that come with it, the mantra, the pranayama, whatever it is, because it is a medicine. It's it can be a spiritual practice, absolutely. But it can also be a really beautiful medicine. But like any medicine, too much of it or too much of it the wrong way is not going to be really good. And so in the end, even though we worked really hard to bring in what we wanted to bring in, and for some people, like there were a lot of people who really felt the effect and really loved what we're just trying so hard to create. And I feel like they really understood our hearts. Ultimately, what we felt like was we were just enabling people's imbalances. You know, the people who would have these severe structural issues in their body and still doing 3 and 4 hot yoga classes and fitness classes back to back, and then their days off, air quotes, seeing one of our teachers who was taking their money for personal training sessions where they were lifting heavy weights and all these things. And just the I could not continue to go on feeling like what I was really doing was enabling something that is harmful to people. If a lot of us know ahimsa, right? Where it's like non-harming. We don't that's for me as a practitioner, I feel like one of the biggest ways that I can go against what I'm here to do is harm people in their health. And not only did I feel like I was doing that, individually basically, but here we've got like this huge membership, and a lot of the people are participating in things that I know are not good for them. And so I wasn't even taken seriously for a while, because when we first got the studio, I was probably about 20 pounds heavier than I am now because I was dealing with a health issue. But I am not overweight well, okay, maybe by like Western standards, but I'm not. I'm very muscular. I take very good care of myself. I'm a curvy girl. Always have been a curvy girl. Have no problems being a curvy girl. But with this demographic, because I was carrying a little extra weight, again, I was dealing with a health issue. No one wanted to learn from me. No one was taking me seriously. Um, when I lost weight, because I had corrected what was going on with my health, I that was that people were coming up to me in droves, people who had no business trying to lose weight, asking me what I did, and all of a sudden they want to have like consultations with me. And I was just like, I cannot with this. And when I'll wrap it up here in a second, but I want to say I was never coming from a place of judgment, because what it really did was give me a true temperature read, not just as an outsider, but truly as an insider of what goes on in our psyches collectively when it comes to yoga in the West. I wanted to be doing more wellness stuff, and people did not want to hear about it at all. And so um that was a very painful thing for me. And that's, we just closed March 2024. Um and it was very painful for me, mostly because I felt the bigness of how far we have to go and how actually abusive and harmful that industry really is if we're not careful. And it makes me deeply sad.
Yeah. I really think it's so important what you're talking about, because you're touching on a lot of the body shaming that's really enmeshed with yoga in the United States. And it's not all yoga in the United States, it's Westernized yoga
Yeah.
wherever it is. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not necessarily, in this country, but it's this Westernized form of yoga that's like, let's the yoga body diet and let's, get the yoga body. And that's really not what Vedic yoga is at all. And I think there's space for that kind of yoga that's more like a workout for people who want to do it like that.
Sure.
I think it's important to make the distinction, what it
Yeah,
is and
let's
what it
not
is.
confuse them. Yep, absolutely.
And even and what you're talking about, is even different than that, because even if we're only thinking about workout yoga versus Vedic yoga, you know, or traditional yoga, then we could say, even no matter what the workout is, body shaming isn't a healthy part of it. You know, if we're coming at it from that space of, let me kind of force my body to be what I think it should be versus how can I celebrate what my body can do.
Absolutely. And you know, we had people who really truly put time and effort and did amazing things in their practice. There's no question about that. And
Yeah.
I don't want to downplay how beautiful that is. I just, like you said, I want to create the distinction of what it is and what it isn't. And I think about like one of our teachers in particular, let's say by society standards, absolutely gorgeous, amazing physical body, you know, younger. We had a couple of people like this, but one teacher in particular. And I just watched how these women would idolize her. And all they wanted was, oh, if I do what she does, I'm going to look like her. And it's like,
Yeah.
no, you're not. You're not even genetically predisposed to look anything like this person. And I remember
Yeah.
one woman who was tiny. I think she was probably 90 pounds soaking wet. And she was
Mm.
one of the people who would constantly go to 3 or 4 classes a day, and she would always grab the little bit of skin on her stomach and talk about how she had to get rid of the stomach fat. And this is a mother of 2 in her 40s, maybe late 30s. And it just made me sad. Again, I'm not trying to shame. It makes me
Uh,
really, really sad, especially, well, for a million reasons. But when I think about what the true offerings are of like traditional or Vedic yoga to free us from these human shackles, so that it's not about having to live up to these ridiculous standards, but instead it's to free us so we live up to our own standards. Like, what is my potential? Because that's what wants to be expressed through me, and me setting my own standards for myself. That's what is available, and it's really sad to watch that get so confused that it's just psychologically messing with people.
yeah, and it is. I mean, I think it's, I mean, I know, of course, you're not coming from a shaming place, but I do think it's important for us to say that, because it's not like we're looking at people and saying, oh, they're doing it wrong. It's just, I think that we feel for them, because we know that none of us would be looking at our own bodies and judging and criticizing unless we were in a cultural conditioning that taught us to do that.
Absolutely.
I mean, none of us do that by nature. None of us are going to do that without the intervention of this shame-based wellness culture and shame-based marketing. I mean, how many products depend on us feeling bad about ourselves somehow, right, in order for us to buy them?
Yeah.
And that translates into this thing we're talking about, where we're talking about this kind of pervasive energy of shame that's composes so much of the approach to the wellness world in the West, and you know, particularly in our country, in the US, where we are now. And because how many people in the wellness industry are using shame to sell their products or their services, and the yoga world is doing a lot of that, you know, the yoga clothes and the yoga workout, and you know, how can you tone this or that body part by doing some certain yoga asana practice? And we, you know, it's just, when this word that yoga comes from, right, the Sanskrit word yuj, to yoke together, which we know means self-integration, when the whole purpose of the system is to help us reclaim the parts of us that we've abandoned and shamed and suppressed, and then we see that the whole framework is coming from shame, it feels like disharmonious to us and tense, because that's not really yoga. when we're using it to create a disconnect for people, which you weren't doing, I know, but
No, no, of
but
course,
you
yeah.
you were working within that construct
Yeah.
where it's like that's what so many people wanted from you,
Yes.
was that approach that reaffirmed their deficiency, and here's how we can make you better, but you weren't interested in helping people feel more deficient and needing to be fixing.
Absolutely. And the other thing that was really hard on me, um, and I couldn't believe how it, I was one of the owners of this studio, and I could not believe how hard this next thing was that I'm about to share. So we like I said, we bought the studio, and there had been an existing manager, and it was a young woman, young, blonde, skinny, flexible, which is fine. I'm also not shaming that group, right?
Right.
And we don't I did not want all of our marketing material and Instagram posts and things like that to look like our young, skinny, blonde, white manager. Not to mention,
Yeah.
we were in South San Diego. We were right near the border to Mexico. The majority,
Yeah.
the white people were definitely of the minority. And
Yeah.
it was a huge Latina, Latina community. Obviously, there's a lot more to, there's a lot of groups that were there, but that was a dominant part of our culture. And
Yeah.
this was part of what was hard is I'm watching these varied, beautiful women wanting to look like the manager.
Yeah.
And I would consistently say, because she handled our Instagram for a while, I would consistently say, please diversify. Please diversify the posts. Um, with body, with gender, with non-gender, with color, like please diversify because I really do want who we have here to be exemplified. This doesn't even
Yeah.
reflect, that reflects Westernized yoga, but that also doesn't even reflect who people are going to see when they come to our studio.
Yeah.
And at first, one curvy black woman was put on our Instagram, like this token. And then it went back to all skinny white women. And
Oh my God.
I almost hit the roof. Trust me, I
Mm.
I really got to work on my spiritual progress at this studio, and I knew that that was part of it because to be just totally raw, my inclination is to judge that stuff because it makes me absolutely nuts. And I usually have to crawl out and climb myself out of the tree that I go into using my
Yeah.
spiritual practices to not feel so angry about it. I really felt very upset. And so I would remind, and then it was like, oh, great, let's put a black guy in. Awesome. And then we would just go right back. And I was like, so what they finally said to me when I kept confronting was that there was not a lot of imaging available. There were not a lot of stock photos and things like that. We knew that we could take pictures of our people, but one of the things that we didn't want to do, I don't, unless we did like a mock class, I really don't want to be taking pictures of people in their yoga practice. That just didn't feel good to me. So could we have done a mock class to get some of the pictures? We could have, and we did not get around to it, and that is definitely something we could have done better. Um, but so that was another thing that made me really sad that there were very, very few. And, you know, they were all able-bodied people who have full capacity of their physical body. They're like, where are people who are amputees? Because we also had a heavy veteran community, like, because we did some free classes for our veterans, given where we were, and also for our local military. And so there were people coming in that had all kinds of things going on physically that wasn't
Yeah.
reflected in our marketing. And so I was like, okay, well, if that's the problem that we're having, I'm going to go scrape the internet and see what I can find. And to be
Yeah.
honest, it was insanely limited. She was not kidding about that. And when you would find people of color, they were totally made white. You know, like their hair was definitely like whitewashed, like the whole thing. And it was just like, oh my God. Like I just started to feel sicker and sicker and sicker because when we talk about shame or we talk about the dysfunction of the wellness world, when I think about imagining what it would be like to be a person of color and like never seeing myself reflected in this entire industry that is all about, oh no, we're inclusive, light and love, no, there's no judgment, we just love everyone. And it's like, that's really easy for you to say. Let's, as a white person, really easy for you to say and to bypass that not everybody's having that experience, and people don't know that they belong and that they really are there because they're not seeing anything that reflects them. It's the same thing with people with large bodies in yoga. That is very intimidating. We have one of my favorite teachers who's still one of my absolute dearest friends. She's like 6'3", and at one point she weighed almost 300 pounds, and she's an amazing yoga practitioner. Do you know that I went to like all of her classes, and the women who were curvy were like, yes. And so her
Huh.
classes were getting full for the women who were just like, yes, this is what I need. And so I so passionately and deeply wanted to be able to represent real yoga and the
Yeah.
yoking and the unification of humanity and consciousness and awareness. And every turn, every step, we just kept hitting walls.
I mean, that whole experience really does speak to the systemic nature of the problem. And I have
Yes.
found a very similar experience with my own, web page building and marketing and all of that as well, because I remember when I first built my website, I think it was maybe, I don't know, 20 years ago, maybe. I don't know. I'm not great with time. Maybe it was 10 years ago. I don't know. I avoided getting a website as long as I possibly could because, for those who don't know, I'm not a super technically inclined person. Like, it's a miracle that we're making a podcast. I can't even believe how that is. Like, I'm uploading podcast episodes on a thing on the internet. I just don't even know how this is happening. But the fact that I built a website was its own miracle at the time. And I seriously avoided it as long as possible. Because I'm like, that's not my wheelhouse. But I learned it and I did it. However, I remember going through that process and how hard it was for me to dig for images that represented most of the people I work with who are not white. Most of the people I work with aren't white people. And so when you know, when I want to represent, like you're saying, the people I work with, the people who I want to know, I want to see my site and know, this is for you. I think it's, if anything, we should be ashamed of how much people have to dig to find stock
Yes.
photos of
100%.
people who are white, skinny, blonde women. I mean, honestly, like that,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
that's the thing I think is maybe worthy of some shame.
That's fair. That's fair. Yeah. Because it's
Most of the stuff we're shaming,
horrifying.
not so much.
Right. Right.
And then even like today, now if I need to go and find a picture, but it's like you said, because we want people to feel safe in our classes, in our one-on-one sessions. And there's a fine line between marketing and exploiting. We don't want to exploit somebody's private,
Absolutely. Yep.
you know, healing experience by leveraging it so we can market ourselves. I think that's
Yep.
really unethical, like saying. And
Very.
so I do think it's important to be conscious of that. And so then our choices are that, right? So we create some kind of artificial circumstance where we're doing a mock thing to take pictures, or we're looking for stock photos online. And even now, when I'm looking for photos that actually look like the people I work with, it's hard to find them even now, like however many years later from when I first, started doing this internet stuff. And so, I mean, I think that says a lot that so many years later, it's still, you have to really dig to
Yep.
find it. And, you know, it speaks to who we're standardizing, who
Hmm.
we're defaulting. It's like, I remember when I was growing up, one of my relatives told me that, um, if you talk about someone, you, I mean, I had a racially diverse group of, people racing me. But so I had somebody tell me that if you talk about somebody and you're describing them, if you want to describe their race, you need to describe everybody's race because white isn't the default. And I
Yes.
was like, I mean, that really stuck with me in my whole life. It's like, and I've noticed how many people, they'll describe folks and say, it's like they'll say this, you never see the person, but they're describing somebody and it's like all their characteristics. And then they'll talk about somebody who's not white, and then their race is their first characteristic that gets described. And it's like, white is not the default.
Right.
It's
Right.
really not.
Right. Or it shouldn't be, but it is. You
Right.
know,
Yeah.
and
I think
it's like, yeah, yeah, it's absolutely true. And
yeah.
yeah, and that's so inherent in the issue itself, where it's like a person's color is always a thing. If they're not white, it's always a part of the conversation. Um, but yeah, so
Like even with non-white people, I find that happens a lot. And it's like, but I don't know. I spend a lot of time. I mean, I don't know. I don't socialize with a lot of white people, so I can't really speak to that very well. But but what I can say is just that's, when we think about shame and how it's infused in wellness, I do think it's important to think about representation because
absolutely.
we are often, without meaning to, we are shaming anybody who's different than what we're presenting. And, so we can unconsciously hold up a lot of shame-based initiatives by promoting certain stereotypes that we don't really mean to be promoting.
Yeah.
And I think that is important to kind of sit with and reflect upon, what we're really holding up as the standard for people. Because for everybody who's a practitioner in the wellness world of any kind, it doesn't have to be Ayurveda or yoga, but
No.
anybody who is putting themselves out in the world as a healer does have the responsibility to consider, like,
Yes.
what's the standard trying to hold up as the vision people are working towards?
Yeah, and
And
we
does
can't
that
love
standard,
sorry, go ahead.
that people, oh, sorry, does that standard promote people to love themselves more and to celebrate themselves more and integrate, which is healthier? Or is
Mhm.
that standard promoting some ideas of they don't fit? Like in the Vedic world, I mean, I'm a gay woman. In a lot of the Vedic world, there's a lot of homophobia, and I'm explicitly excluded.
Mhm.
And so I will not go to places unless they specifically say they're welcome to me, because I know I'm going to be, you know, shamed through conversion therapy if I go to some
Right.
place that doesn't explicitly say.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this stuff is important.
It's so important, and that's why, like, we didn't, we actually so gay pride is, like, huge I mean, it's huge in a lot of places, but San Diego, there is a huge, LGBTQ community, which is one of the things I absolutely love about San Diego, and, um so we didn't necessarily make Pride Month a big deal. We're like, this just needs to always be. So, like, we proudly kept a flag in our front window. It was a huge flag up top so that people knew that they were absolutely safe there, because also being where we were, um truly, like, I will say, one of the things that was so sad for me about the studio is there's a lot of people that I deeply, deeply love. I just wasn't able to penetrate this world in the way that I wanted to. But I deeply loved the community and the relationships that I had with these people. Like all of them, the students, other teachers, all of that. So um there was a heavy influence of Catholicism for a lot of our members, because that's a very common thing, of course, with we of course a lot of Mexican people, but Central and South America as well. Um, and so even though a lot of the people super open-minded, like don't even think about it, we would get people who were scared to even do yoga because they had heard their whole life that it was like this demonic thing. And so, you know, we were very aware, surely to God, there are going to be some homosexual or trans Mexican folk, that were raised in Catholicism that need to know that they can be totally open here, like completely open. And we had a few teachers that were gay. Um, Again, not because they were tokens, but because like well, one of them was there when we bought the studio and we just wanted to keep him because he was like a great teacher and he wanted to keep working there. So that was super simple, obviously. But again, not in a contrived way and not for exploitation or tokenism. It was everything to us that we would have the representation so that everyone knew that our establishment was for them, that it was a safe place, and that we would, like Zeb and I and a lot of the community and teachers would go really far to protect and take care of the people who needed more safety. Also, I mean, we know that we had illegal immigrants, air quotes again. And so we, at one point, we had little notes up around the studio, in the bathrooms, letting them know that they were also safe, that we were a safe place for them. Because like I thought for myself, I can't imagine having escaped a really bad situation and going to a place for safety and wanting to know on some level, whether it was super conscious or not, that when I come and do my yoga practice, like these people are going to take care of me and look out for me, you know.
Yeah.
And so because obviously that's a very sensitive thing there. We're literally 10 minutes from the wall. So
Hmm.
and people would come in from Tijuana to take our classes, to come to our studio. So that's one of the things that I loved so much about this space. It was so rich with so many different cultures, but also so many different real world things that are
Yeah.
going on for people that are very, very real. The shame of, you know, maybe not being in the United States legally, and how, and just feeling not even safe in your own space, right? Like the shame of
Yeah.
that potentially, because for some people it's like they just don't have the resources to go through that process. It's not that they wouldn't, it's that they don't have the resources to do it. And so, there's just so many different ways that we can come into the wellness world. There's so many entry points of shame that we can land in the wellness world for support on a variety of levels. And I just feel like, again, like we cannot love and light people to death out of these real, true human things that are happening in our world right now, where people are not everyone, legitimately, not everyone is safe.
Yeah. Oh my God. I think that's so important because I see so much of that. Just love everybody. Just love everybody. I don't think it's loving to spiritually bypass the suffering that people are going through. That's not loving to me.
No, it's
That's
right up
the
there. It's like, oh no, I don't
opposite,
see color. It's like, no,
right?
no,
That's
no.
crazy.
That's crazy making.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
just can't. I mean, and I just think that's so crucial because to me that's a whole lot of spiritual bypassing. Just
yeah.
love and light, let's all get along. I don't have to get along with everybody. That is not a requirement of my spiritual practice. It's not.
No, it's
If we
not.
look at, I remember when I was learning about, you know, I'm trying to think about when this was. I don't know. I'm horrible with timelines, but at some point, I was learning from one the person who was mainly, I guess, probably my most influential early teacher in my Vedic studies, and her name was Parandevi, and she was teaching me about different forms of, what in the West is often called divine feminine,
Oh
and
God,
it was
that's a
just
show.
yeah. So we would just call it was. Devi, right? So Devi meaning like the expressions of Shakti or the active energy in the universe, just for people who are new to this or not familiar. And so we were talking about Durga because and that was a big moment for me because she was teaching about Durga and how Durga has her boundaries and she's the expression of what it looks like for us to hold our boundaries, to hold people accountable for when they violate them, and also how to work with anger as a sacred emotion. Because when when we have these stories of Durga, in particular this Vedic scripture, I think you call it scripture, but it's called Devi Mahatmya. And it's this whole story of Durga and how she fights a battle over demons that fundamentally ensues because one of them tries to forcibly take her for a wife. And she's like, no, this is not happening. This isn't what we're doing. And that whole story is like you could read it on the surface and just think, oh, look at all this violence taking place and just not get anything out of it. But when you learn it with a teacher in a lineage, it's very different because what it's teaching us is what it looks like for us as sovereign beings to stand up for ourselves and to get free of all that nonsense, trying to get us to abandon our own sovereignty by getting along with everybody. We don't have to get along with everybody. It's okay if I like some people and don't like others. It's okay if I disagree with people and not others. The point is, I could, what Durga teaches us, which I found so freeing, is what it looks like to hold somebody accountable for violating a human rights boundary.
Yeah.
And so when we're having these present day situations, which we're going to have through all of human existence, because there's always going to be human rights violations, and so this scripture of Devi Mahatmya is teaching us what it looks like when someone violates the dharma, which is the higher harmony, and the higher harmony is human rights. It's respecting all beings. And so when we're thinking about human rights, we're not just thinking about what do I want, what's good for me, we're thinking about what's good for all people. And when we have people in the real world going through their own experiences with human rights violations, and we're telling people just love everybody, just get along, no. That's when my inner Durga is coming out and saying, no, this is not okay. It's not okay. I'm not going to love and light in the face of somebody saying these people aren't human, these people deserve rights, these people don't. No.
Yeah.
Everybody deserves equal rights. Everybody deserves to be recognized as a sacred human being. I don't care. I don't care what color anybody is. I don't, trans people, gay people, we all need to be recognized as equally human and equally sacred. And that to me is really important because I think there's all of this shaming going on that I see where people are trying to basically shame us into going to that love and light form of spiritual bypassing. And that is not ethically aligned for me at all. So I'd love to hear what you have to say about that because I have a lot of passion about that,
Ooh, I
honestly.
do too. Zeb and I always refer to it because it's the way that I pull it from my brain from the Vedic text is righteous anger.
Yeah.
There is something about a righteous anger, and we are in what we would call like the Kali Yuga. It's a time that is tough. It is legitimately tough, and I think that it's it's incredibly privileged for those who have the privilege of bypassing and love and lighting everything and throwing out blanket statements of inclusion, um, and not personally for me not calling it out when we see stuff. And so I found that for me, I feel that I would call myself, like you, I would call you this, like a sacred activist. Like, I'm not
Yeah.
just an angry person running around who just wants to discharge my angst, which I feel like
Right.
there is a lot of that going on. And I don't think that's bad. I think it's just energy and attention that could be redirected into something more productive. And I
Yeah.
understand why people are so angry right now. I think everyone has a right to be really angry. The challenge
Yeah.
is I feel like we're really getting angry at the wrong people, and that we can use some of the wrong people, not all the wrong people, let's be honest. But like when I go onto social media and I see the way people are yelling at each other, and I don't get into conversations like this a lot on social media. I know a lot of people do, but I don't, because I don't find that people go onto social media to legitimately educate themselves. They go on to argue. And I don't I'd have no interest in playing at that level. For me, it's, having that yoga studio and seeing what I could do, right? And I know that we affected even just a little bit of change. I know that we did. And so maybe that's as far as we could take it, right? It's not that we weren't able to
Yeah.
accomplish anything. It's just in my heart, it wasn't as much as I would have liked to have seen. But that doesn't mean that things were not accomplished. I am currently um, working with a company as one of their staff, that for me is a very white establishment, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. However,
Yeah.
I feel it is my duty as a sacred activist to point things out as I see them, and not in a way that, because this is an open group. And so I feel that I would rather put myself in situations where I can affect change, where I can gain the respect and the relationships with people who are some of the change agents, so that I can sort of highlight and point out, like, oh, look, why is it that we only have like white scholars working with all of this material? Like, maybe we could, you know what I mean? And again, I'm not making I think diversity is important. Like me, I am as white as they get, and I'm an Ayurvedic practitioner, right? Like, this is my world. So I'm not here to throw stones. I'm just saying that if everyone on the board and basically everyone on the team are all white people, and we're talking about all things Eastern, and we're doing a lot of the love and lighting, I think we need to look at that, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, my I feel that my lane is more telling the truth and calling things how I see them in a very diplomatic but a very clear and concise way, and showing people how it can be done by demonstration. So I like to put myself in roles of quote unquote power at other establishments, or my own when I create them, so that I can demonstrate rather than having to shout at people and yell at people. I use my internal rage that I have sometimes, and I use my passion to be a demonstrator in my life. And that's not accessible to everyone, but I feel like we all have our own ways where we have opportunity to be change agents. And because you and I are so deep in the wellness world, I think we really have our work cut out for us.
Yeah. I love so much of what you just said. And we do have our work cut out for us, part of which is why we created this podcast, right? Because
Mhm.
we really would like to open this up for people who are seeking. I mean, because we know that if you and I are sitting here thinking these things and seeing these things and seeing this change that's needed, there are so many others out there feeling the same way, seeing the same things, noticing the same problems. And part of our purpose here is to help, connect folks with guidance and tips and discussions that will help to, find others like them, and to find practitioners who can offer this kind of authenticity, but and also to, just know for themselves that they're okay,
Yeah.
that it's them. They're not the only ones looking around seeing these problems. And
Yeah.
like when we talk about righteous anger, I mean, I love that, because I think that is one of the most misunderstood things that I see being, this term that I do see people say that a lot, that I don't see that very many people understand how to distinguish it from egoic anger. And that is one of the things that text of Devi Mahatmya teaches us, because that Durga's anger is not the kind of anger that we as humans think our egos, like we say, oh well, she can get angry, so I can get angry. And then we, in our egoic illusion, can easily give ourselves permission to embody that egoic form of anger, which really just means I want what I want and I'm going to do whatever it takes to get it. So I'm angry because I didn't get what I want, and whatever that could be. I mean, it's like some people are angry because what they want is to have super gendered bathrooms, and some people are angry because they want the whole country to be white and Christian, and some people are angry because they went to the store and stood in line too long. It's like whatever we're angry about in that egoic way, it fundamentally just amounts to I didn't get what I want, and I want to make the world bend to my will somehow so I get what I want, which is a very different thing than this, like the Vedic way that we get taught about this form of righteous anger, which is anger when the dharma is being violated, which means that it's anger because the higher harmony of what's beneficial for everybody in that situation is being violated. So it's when we see people not getting treated fairly, when we see ourselves not getting treated fairly. So like that kind of righteous anger is really our signal that somebody's boundary is getting violated, whether it's ours or another person's. And that form of anger, it doesn't control us, right? So like a lot of people are saying righteous anger, and they really just mean I want to have the right to be angry and like spew my hatred and my curses all over everybody with divine sanction. But what we mean when we're talking about righteous anger in the Vedic terms is just to help people out there who are listening, right, is that it's really about an anger that it arises, it gives you information, it doesn't take control over you. Mm-hmm. And it informs you. You take time to see the information that is springing you. You choose your actions from that space consciously. And then the emotion of anger it dissipates because it's given you the information, and then it's gone. But the egoic anger, it doesn't do that. It arises because we don't get what we want. It sticks around, it festers, it grows, it controls our actions without our conscious consent, and it spews itself all over the first available outlets that come, right? And it doesn't dissipate. It just grows and grows and grows. And so that's like, for people who are listening, that may help folks to start, learning and discerning, like what's really that that higher self, divine self part of us, giving us information through our sacred emotion of anger, versus like when our egos want to kind of create a story around the anger because it's like, well, I didn't get what I want, so I'm mad about it. And then how do I get what I want? And it's like, I mean, it could literally be anything. It could be like my partner didn't give me enough attention, so I'm angry. Or I waited in line too long at the store, so I'm angry. Or that person cut me off on the road, so I'm angry. It's like anytime we don't get what we want, we're angry. But then we know like that's not really our righteous anger. It's just our little toddler, petulant ego self throwing a temper tantrum. And that doesn't really need as much respect as we give it typically.
No, absolutely. And I do think there is a lot of that. And, on the one hand, like I appreciate it as a stage of development. Like when I see people who are just learning about how to use boundaries for the first time, right? It's very different than people who start to just exude like, nope, that doesn't work for me. Thank you though. Like it took me a long time to get there. At first it was just like, no, I said so because these are my boundaries. Like it had to be this big, like, these are it, Again, that was me being more of an angsty teenager, but which is fine, right? Again, I think it can all be a part of our stages of development as we refine and learn about ourselves. But I think that's just it. It's easy to get lost in thinking that it really is about getting what we want, like you're saying, instead of actually reflecting and going, wait a second, this is just one stage in my evolution. How can I actually move forward and hone in on this a little bit more to affect some of the change that I would like to see? And I think for me too, I think this is a place where one of the very rare places that you and I differ, because there are not a lot of those. You have had more traditional training throughout. I did not. I was, without knowing it, being indoctrinated into Western culture. and had to find
Oh,
my way out. And I can tell you that part of the appeal for me of us doing this podcast just based on my own journey is that I didn't know what I didn't know. And I would have been all too happy to have gotten feedback and input way earlier on. But I don't think I was supposed to. I think I was
yeah.
supposed to learn a little bit more about this process of westernization and colonization and what goes on so that I
Yeah.
could sort of F it, if you will, from my own head and my own being so that I had that sort of perspective, because I trust that there are people who will stumble upon this podcast however they do because they're authentic seekers, right?
Yeah.
And they don't realize that this is something that they have been participating in all along. But given the
Yeah.
new information, they would be doing something very different because that was me and that's still me. I find that one of me, like a lot of people, I always will say that I'm always a teacher, but I'm always a student first. If I am
Yeah.
doing something that I could improve, it really in any realm, particularly this realm, because I am not a person of color. I am not someone in the LGBTQ community. I am not someone who lost my leg in a war or was born with a birth defect. There are
Yeah.
things that I fundamentally can only understand to a certain point. I can connect
Yeah.
in, but I can only understand it from as far as I can go. And so I am always open for feedback and to learn how as a woman of privilege, I can use that privilege that I get to have to affect change and redirect where I feel the energy needs to go the most. And that includes not playing on people's shame. It's part of what was so, like, what a privilege it was that we had an investor who was willing to invest in us to be able to purchase a yoga studio, to be able to be leadership in a community, in a small, in a town, in a place like San Diego. That's all privilege. And I
Yeah.
didn't take that lightly, and I never denied the fact that that is what privileged people get to do, right?
Yeah.
And I wanted to use it for the better for everyone, not because I'm some like white hero. Like that's not it at all. It's that I keep my ears and my antenna really listening, and my love of humanity and my love and desire for people to feel fully embraced and loved and seen and valued and treasured just because they are, and to help them remember that they are whole and they are perfect exactly as they are. That passion in me is greater than anything else that I have. And so everything that I have, if the more it can be directed and refined into that place, the better. That's really what I'm here for. But this podcast for me is a very important message because I was the person who walked around with privilege, not understanding how much privilege I had, and didn't know what exactly to do with it until my eyes were opened by the people who cared enough to point it out to me. And so I think
Yeah.
one of the big things is that I pray that we all have an open mind and that we all have an open heart. That when someone points out to us, hey, that is really harmful, like assault to me and my sort of group of people, then we say,
Yeah.
oh my God, I'm so sorry. Can you please help me understand and see? You know, don't deny it. Don't defend. Don't do any of that. You don't even have to agree. Just listen.
Mhm.
Just listen with your heart and listen and let whatever it is like sink in and just be with it. Be with the wisdom of what other people need to share about the oppression that they have faced, whether it's because they've been obese their whole lives or they're a part of the LGBT, community, all the things. Listen to the oppression that they have had to live with, whether it's been a lived external experience or whether it's been a deeply internal experience. For most people, it's both. And that needs to be heard and that needs to be held, because without that, we're not going to see the mass healing, for lack of a better term, in the world that so many of us want to see. There are a lot of people who are hurting and feeling shamed because that's what they're being fed.
Yeah, I think the stuff you're saying is so what I'm thinking, and like what I'm hearing as you're saying this is that this too is about shame, because when people feel ashamed as they're hearing these areas in which maybe they have unconsciously or accidentally participated in some harmful thing,
Yep.
the shame needs to be released for us when we encounter that, right? Because that
Yep.
too is shame, and that shame that we feel can cause us to lock down into rigidity and not to be open in our hearts and our minds to making the shifts that those experiences are teaching us to make, right? So when we and so I think that is such a crucial thing to bring up, as we're getting to the end of our time in this episode, to just let people know, to be, that it's important to, not be ashamed of who you are and not be ashamed of where you maybe have messed up. Because I think for us to say, I messed up, I can do it differently, that's a healthy thing. And I think for us to release the shame about what does it mean about us if we make a mistake, right?
Yeah.
And that we're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to be unconsciously racist, probably. We're all going to be unconsciously bigoted, most likely. I mean, because there's so much systemic bigotry in our in our different cultures, that I think it would be weird if we didn't accidentally do some of that, even for the best, most kind-hearted people.
Yep.
And so but when I've seen so many folks who it's like I may be talking to somebody and mention to them how something that they're saying may sound very different than what they mean, because it's going to land, like it's going to land on me, a person, differently than maybe how they mean it.
Yeah.
But then because they feel so much like shame and embarrassment because they want to be an ally, it's like they shut down and they're not even willing to hear me.
Yeah.
And so,
Or you
so
didn't
I think that,
understand. No, you didn't understand. And it's just like, whoa, that's not what we're talking about. Yeah.
yeah. And it's like that, that shame that we put on ourselves is important to really consciously release, because it does cause us to not only perpetuate systems of healing that harm us in our own habits and our own, beliefs and identities and whatever flows from that, but because it can cause us to unconsciously and even intentionally harm other people.
Yeah.
Because we do, our minds and our hearts really can't be open if we're trying to be perfect. We can't, because we're not ever going to be perfect. So if every time we bump up against some evidence that we're not perfect, we feel ashamed and we have to deny it in order to preserve our identity, then there's not that opportunity for making a beneficial shift. So I think that's really important to just encourage everybody. So we're encouraging you all to be nice to yourselves and be kind to yourselves, and to know that if you realize something that an opportunity that you want to shift something, or somebody's trying to help you, understand their way of living in the world a little bit better, that, don't be ashamed of areas where maybe you've made a mistake. Just apologize and know that there's nothing wrong with you. Just apologize and choose to do it differently. That's okay. Because none of
Yeah.
us is ever going to be like a perfect example of humanity. Like not even our most beloved spiritual leaders are that. Nobody's that.
Yeah. No, it's so true. It's one of the things. So I was, I grew up in the 12-step programs and spent a long time there myself. And one of the things that I really loved, that's a big conversation too, but there are some beautiful things that I took away that I feel like were very beautiful. And one of them was when you get to a certain step and you're making amends. And so what
Oh
you're
yeah.
talking about makes me think about the making of amends, which is yeah, saying you're sorry, but it's more about the willingness to be in reflection of and then to correct the behavior. And so that's what I
Yeah.
hear you basically saying, is that it's really important to just be willing to make your amends, is to just be reflective and then change the behavior, and I really do think that that's truly, what this is about. And that's a big thing in the wellness world too, is changing our behavior. The willingness to listen, deep listening, um, the willingness to truly distinguish between yoga as a fitness or yoga as a way of life and a way of seeing the world, right? Like,
Yeah.
because the last piece, for at least on my end, I know we've got to wrap up here in a minute, but when I think about when you were talking about yoga and the yoking and the word, what that means, I
Yeah.
also think of like microcosm, macrocosm, because I think one of the most dangerous perspectives is that when there's a lack of human rights for any group, and people will think, oh, well, that's just that group, it doesn't affect me. Oh, well, that's happening to that group. And it's like, no. No, when there's acts of racism or bigotry or anything like that, it hurts all of us. It hurts the oppressor and it hurts the oppressed, just in different ways. It is an active engagement of a form of violence, intentional or not,
Yeah.
and with a system that is busted, and people are willing to uphold busted systems that are not really taking a stand for everyone, no one
Yeah.
wins. Part of this dualistic frame, that we could participate in is, well, if one person wins, then another person loses. If one group wins, then that's ultimately going to mean that another group loses. But yoga and the yoking and the teachings of the Vedas say that's absolutely not true. That's part of this Maya that we've been told, and the Leela, the way this is all playing out, are all things that we can participate in different capacities, in different ways. So truly, for me, living in the space of that yoking and that yoga is understanding that I am a part of a human family, of a much larger family, and I care for that family because I understand that this family of mine that's all over the globe is an extension of me, and I'm an extension of them. And if something isn't good for them, then it's not good for me. And even if the challenges that we face don't have just easy solutions, I don't think any of this does. But I do feel having the perspective and the emotional intelligence to understand that we get to create systems where we can, that are inclusive, that are not dualistic, where there can be the win-win-win scenarios across the board. And so that
Yeah.
for me is one of the things that keeps me going, and what I try to ignite everywhere that I go, in the little ways. Like, I'm little guy. I'm like on the little scale, and that's fine, because we need people on all levels who are willing to show up in these ways, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Yeah, because I mean, just tying it back to, yeah, like you're saying, our theme of releasing shame and shifting shame-based frameworks in the wellness world, that we're, that shame can easily lead us to a place of thinking we're powerless. Like we can't make a change. We can't influence because we could, part of that is shaming us into believing we're not powerful, that we can't make a change, or but all of us, whatever our sphere of influence is, whatever I mean, even if it's just us and our pets, or like us in our immediate community, like it really doesn't matter, because it is like you're saying, that in the Vedic framework, we do understand that we're all connected. So whatever we're doing within our own sphere of influence to embody, and I think it is like you did bring up that embodiment. Like we don't just want to pay lip service
Yeah.
to, you know, don't shame yourself, don't shame others. You know, you and I are people who really embody that,
Mhm.
not shaming. Like there's no shame in our process. There's no shame in our own discoveries. There's no shame in acknowledging that, you know, we're always evolving beings. And, you know, to understand something more in the Vedic world, you teach it, right? Because people
Mhm.
in the West, they always say like those who don't do teach, or those who can't do teach, right? And that's not the framework in the Vedic world. It's that if you're studying and studying and studying, you hit a point where you literally have to teach, because if you don't start teaching, you're never going to understand it more. Because once you start explaining it to other people, you learn more and you understand more. And so it's like you have this whole discovery that continues as you're teaching. And so, so much of that growth and development in the wellness world is stagnated
Yeah.
when we're approaching it from that shame-based framework, whether it's, people who have been accustomed to systems that are shame-based, and then they feel ashamed that they're in a shame-based system, so they don't want to change it because admitting that it's wrong, and they can't
Yeah.
admit that they're wrong. They want to perpetuate it just because they don't want to be like, oh, I'm ashamed, I'm wrong. So it's like all of this, like the more we can release that shame, the better for everyone. Wherever we can do it. And that is why it's so important for us to start with ourselves and our own internal orientation to our lives and our process, because that is how we're relating to everybody else. That's how we're relating to our businesses. If we're, some kind of wellness provider of some type, or whatever we're doing out there in the wellness world. There's so many different careers. But it is how we're going to relate. It's how we're going to create our practices. It's how we're going to relate to ourselves, our friends, our family. And it matters how we show up, and so changing how we show up matters. And if we're ashamed of ourselves, we teach other people to be ashamed of themselves. And so when we show up, like that's one of the reasons why we decided to call our podcast Unfiltered, because we want it to be explicit that we're unfiltered. We're just ourselves. We're here showing up as ourselves, and we're not editing our videos. We're just showing up and deciding that day what we're going to talk about, and really having this embodied presence that lets people know that it's okay to do that too, that you don't have to be ashamed of who you are. You don't have to craft your appearance based on whatever you think everybody else wants.
Yeah.
Just be yourself, and the people who are looking for you can find you.
Absolutely. And I think that's the most powerful message. I really do. I think that's the most powerful message, because the more we link up with people who have the courage to be really who they are in a world that is consistently telling us not to be, that's really when we find our people, and we find even more strength, and we find that we can do things that maybe we couldn't do just by ourselves, even if it's because we feel more inspired and we feel more power because we know we have people to relate to us, so yeah, it's like anything, we know what it's like to have, fear, and then that fear multiplies, and then we can go down a rabbit hole of fear. Shame is the same way, but so is everything on the spectrum. So is joy.
Yeah.
So is, you know, being authentic. So is, being demonstrating certain ways of being. They're all like that. Everything that we do is a sacred prayer, and it will amplify the more that we do it. It doesn't matter what it is. And so we all have to start from where we are. It doesn't matter where we are on our journey. We just start where we are and know that the more I do that one thing or those two things, the more I am amplifying what it is that I create in my world. And then that ripples out into the greater world.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Does that feel like a good place to stop
Yeah, I think
for now? I
for
know we're
now.
almost at time, so we'll
Yeah,
carry forward in the episode and see what comes up there.
exactly.
All right, everybody. Hope you all enjoyed listening to us today.
Have a good week.
Yeah, lots of love. Bye.
Bye.